For this art process, we'll have to travel back in time to last spring. I was sketching first ideas for a cover illustration for Fusion Fragment. I'd worked with them on a previous cover before, so I was excited to be back. Fusion Fragment is a short story anthology, and the cover is inspired by one of the stories included in this edition. In my sketchbook, I wrote notes on what stood out to me while reading, descriptions that resonate, quotes that are inspiring, character and location descriptions. We'd already discussed an overall idea for the cover with these shards of shattered mirrors around the protagonist. But still there were questions to find answers to. What expression do I want to capture? What kind of angle would fit the mood of this moment? And how do I arrange all of these mirror shards to be both natural and a controlled part of the composition? The story by Cressida Rowe, Miss No Face, is a Bluebeard retelling. Each of the eyes trapped in mirror shards has a meaning, represents a specific person, so I took a while to find an arrangement that works. Some of the eyes would be angry, some scared, some sad, and then there are also broken Japanese-style no masks on the illustration as well. Lots of details to iron out, but overall it was a very simple motif of just a character portrait. I sketched a more detailed version of the angled down head, looking more aggressive, intense, and emphasizing that with a red color palette felt fitting. The head angled upwards has a more desperate or overwhelmed, even awed feeling. So I went with a more subdued color palette with lots of blue tones. That's the one we then decided to go with. If you've been around my channel before, you know that I'm always happy with a blue-ish color palette. Around that time, I'd also gotten more and more comfortable making 3D references in DAZ 3D and Blender to figure out lighting. Here especially I wanted to have dramatic lighting, so the mirror shards would cast shadows on our portrait. I didn't make just one single reference. I found that with 3D models, sticking too closely to a specific face can look very stiff and artificial. Instead, I rendered and then also sketched multiple versions and looked at real photography from reference packs, like by Howard Lyon, to get a feel for the face I wanted. I actually really enjoy using traditional media for thumbnail sketches or color studies like this. When working on client pieces, it's sometimes tempting to switch to digital color palette tests, but I found that those then often don't translate so well into the final illustration. Colors just look different when painted digitally when seen on a screen, and a bright red that I've painted in Clip Studio or Photoshop will just not quite look the same when I'm then painting it in acrylics. Watercolors and acrylics are close enough to each other, with my palette containing several similar pigments, so the sketch translates to painting quite well. Sketching studies ahead of a painting lets me figure out lighting, details of eyes or noses, the angle of a mouth, before moving on to the actual drawing. These sketches become a stepping stone, separating my final painting from the references. No matter if I work from 3D references or photographs, I like to have a degree of separation there, so that what I paint is a closer reflection of my imagination that I try to capture in these sketches than just the reference, which is there to anchor the lighting or pose in reality. If you're going for a more realistic art style than my usual semi-realistic and quite stylized approach, sticking closer to a proper reference photograph would of course make much more sense. the story tackles themes of identity, the main character being biracial, but emphasizing that her Japanese features aren't as pronounced as, for example, her sisters. That struggle with identity, heritage, the expectations placed on her, and even the fetishization and the stereotyping that is explored in this Bluebeard retelling were the core themes I wanted to capture in the portrait as well. So I took a while exploring different faces and expressions. I used colored pencils not because they'd give me a realistic result, but to separate warm and cool light in my sketch. I also sketched some detailed views of her eyes, again figuring out lighting and expression, how pronounced I would like her features to look, or even how I want to shape the eyebrow. Eyes really are the main focus of this illustration. Not only our character portrait, but there are all the eyes in the mirror shards as well. I want each of those to have a distinct expression, and it was exciting to get to paint so many different angles too. I'm painting on watercolor paper, which I've mounted to a panel using acrylic medium to make sure it's stretched completely flat. For my pencil sketch, I actually shaded in some of the most important shadow shapes, and you can see that I've broken down with just the line work all of those highlights and shadows, as the lighting is such an important feature of this illustration. I have to admit I didn't really make proper references for each of the eyes, because I was just hopeful that I could capture some different fun expressions by leaning on to all the eyes I've painted in the past. I really enjoyed using this extra long watercolor brush for the underpainting. I could capture lines and details with it that I didn't want to lose because I was really happy with my pencil drawing. But at the same time, I could also scramble the brush around and get some messy paint down for this first hint of color. My underpaintings are nearly always more saturated in color than the finished painting. Some of that more lively burnt sienna will shine through later and can help guide me through the more toned down paint layers. Unlike oil paints, acrylic paint layers of course don't mix. Each layer just means that I'm thinking in stages. During this first paint layer, or the underpainting in this case, I want to just fill the entire surface, get over the fear of the white page, and see if there are any areas I feel unsure about and that might need adjusting or redrawing. The next color layer is problem solving. What exact paint mixes can I work with? Are there any happy accidents from the underpainting that I want to keep alive? How does the expression look, and how low-key or high-key do I want the lighting to be? This is probably what's often called the ugly phase, but it's an essential part of how I work. I just can't solve everything at the very first try. I hope that in the future, with more practice, I can paint more a la prima and really get things right on the first try, but for now I'm really not there yet. This portrait turned more and more desaturated as time went on. Nearly monochrome, you could say. I try to keep a lot of subtle color in there, all the same. Raw umber, a neutral, even cool leaning brown, was an amazing base to mix with everything. I then combined it with burnt sienna, alizarin crimson, ultramarine blue, manganese blue hue, and cobalt turquoise, the star of this painting. Cobalt turquoise is this deep green-blue shade, and mixed with the raw umber leans even more green. I used this toned-down turquoise mix for most of the mirror shard eyes, focusing on value instead of color variation. Only where in a regular portrait there would be intense shades of saturated reds around the eyes did I mix in more raw umber to create some additional warmth by contrast. For a while I was really struggling with the central portrait. I'd gotten so absorbed into painting all of these mirror shards and the individual eyes that I all liked a lot. But the face itself had started to look really wonky. I hadn't kept the shadows as sharp and defined as I originally planned in my sketch, which made everything look a bit puffy and flat. You can also see that I had much more intense highlights at some point on the skin, especially on her cheeks and nose. And I later completely painted over those with this mix of raw umber, burnt sienna, yellow ochre and titanium white. The high contrast of those highlights took attention away from the parts of the illustration I really wanted the focus to go to. Towards the end, I only put some subtle highlights back on the nose and stronger but very small ones on the lips and for her eyes. All of those are central enough and have enough distance to the mirror shards to not overlap and distract too much. Again, that's just something I have to kind of explore and go through during the famous ugly stage, and it's just a part of my process. And I think the exploration and learning while painting and figuring things out as I make mistakes is really what makes the entire process so fun and fulfilling for me. For covers, there's always the typography elements to keep in mind as well. I simplified the bottom and top of the illustration so that it wouldn't distract from the text. And let the brushwork be a bit rougher and looser here, and also toned down the contrast, keeping it mostly to dark shades. But for the center of the image, I went back to some long liner brushes for final details. While I like to have soft edges, even in my finished pieces, there are some parts, like a mirror shard, that really should have a sharp edge, after all, to contrast with the softer rendering of everything else. There's also the one single cut on her face that has some red in it. That's a cadmium red light mixed with burnt sienna, and I used some of that same color mix on the mirror shard and some of her features close by to up the chroma just a bit, as the portrait had turned out a bit too monochrome even for my liking. This painting process then suddenly turned very simple, as I'd laid all the groundwork. My raw umber and cobalt turquoise are both golden open acrylics, so they are slow drying, and blending with them felt very pleasant. I tried to put a lot of character into each eye, but to still have our actual portrait take center stage. Cobalt turquoise and raw umber have since become staples on my palette, and I wanted to share my painting process of this because while I made a lot of mistakes, especially during those first paint layers, it's now one of my favorite illustrations of this year. Maybe because of the simplicity, maybe because I got to paint so many eyes, or because of the beautiful symbolism of the masks as well. There comes a point with acrylic paintings where I've done all the hard work and I get to just have fun with details. For me here, that was of course all of the eyes in this nearly monochrome color palette. Maybe it's the simplicity of that made the final details so much fun. I just received the short story collection a few weeks ago and I'm just really happy with how it turned out. I hope you enjoyed my sketches and studies too. And if you're in the mood for a speculative fiction collection of short stories, Fusion Fragment 26 is now available both as a paperback and ebook version. Thank you so much for watching, and I hope to see you again in my next art video.